So let's have a little chat about Richard Hitchcock and how he treated my mother. So when Ross died, she was left $170,000, and it was Ross's dying wish that I was to make sure that she got a house and she didn't have to pay rent to Richard anymore, because he hated paying rent to Richard. They got a house and they were paying $45 a week with Housing New Zealand, $45 or $65 a week with Housing New Zealand. And Richard said, no, I'll get you a house, it'll be lovely, and you only have to pay me $150 a week. Well, he put on the books that the rent was $300 a week, okay? And Ross pulled me aside and he said, I have to beg to get that $150 out of Richard, because he said he'd give it back to us every week, but he never has. And when I do, he goes, oh, rah, rah, rah. And so they ended up paying $300 a week while Ross was dying. And then when Ross died, he left $170,000 life insurance that came from his work, went straight from his work into Richard's bank account hidden in Australia, and never made it to my mother. And I took my mother to this place in Wallaceville, and she was wrapped, mate. She was like, yeah, I'd like to live here, and it needed a hot water cylinder, but Paul's a plumber, and I could have done the carpets, and we could have flashed it up real good, and it was a community, and it was $110,000, and she still would have had $60,000 for a few repairs, and if ever she needed anything. And it was perfect. It was like a community. They had to pay a little bit each week to just keep the lawns mowed and keep everybody happy, maintenance and that for the driveways and things. But and Richard, he went and had a look at it, and you're not living. And I said, we can make it look brand new, Richard. Paint, new carpet. Paul can do the hot water cylinders and things, the showers. Oh yeah, that's a good idea. And then before you know it, her money was hidden in Australia, and she was forced to go and live with him in a house. And in the first house, well, it was kind of okay because she could get out and go and see her friends. But the second house he brought and put her in prison in, well, that was up a hill and she had to catch a taxi everywhere. And the third house was just utter hell. I'd go around there and she was always mental because no one was seeing her. She was locked in her room. And Richard would stand outside of her room and listen to her talking to herself. And I said, Richard, if she talks to herself, why don't you go and have a talk to her? And he said to me, I think it's cute how she talks to herself. Now, the whole time he had this money hidden in Australia, gaining interest that he never gave back to her, she was paying him rent. So she was paying off all his mortgages. So she paid off probably $170,000 in rent to the guy. This is just atrocious, man, that the government is covering over this fraudster. While she was working for the Defence Force, he was hiding her money, and she was getting benefits from the government. It's just fucking ridiculous. I can't believe I'm living this and no one cares. I complained to the Serious Fraud, and they, just before Labour got out, they sent me an email back saying, oh, look, we found no fraud. So taking $170,000, stealing it from your family, hiding it in Australia is not serious fraud enough. Because he works for the government. He works for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He has access to the spy computers. And he destroys people's lives who outline this. And I have had nothing but destruction in my life. I've had my life turned upside down from this guy. All because he molested me and I came out about it to my mother. And he even stopped me from seeing my mother, and it got worse. As my mother deteriorated, it just got worse. He put more and more pressure on me so I would have nothing to do with it. So he could get away with stealing this $400,000. And I said, and Mum was there, and God is my witness. But she was right in front of me, and she said, listen, Terry, I've left most of my money to my granddaughters, okay? Because they've got children, and I want them to have a good, well, one of them had children. She said, I've left most of my money to my granddaughters, and what's left will be split between you three boys equally. Now, it ended up, my nieces got nothing. So, obviously she left about 60%, 30% to Kayla, 30% to Millie, and probably 40% or 40% was going to be split between us boys, which was, not much. But instead, all the money she earned from the Defence Force was in the will, and Richard got 45%, and Paul got 45%, and Terry got 10%, and Kayla and Millie were taken off it on Mother's deathbed. He's written this will up and signed it themselves, I bet you. There is no way my mother would have excluded her granddaughters from her will. She wanted most of the money to go to my granddaughters. And then, of course, he destroyed my life, making me sign it. And he took all away my incomes, made me homeless, so I'd be forced to sign a will for $5,000 for the money that she earned from Defence, the legal money, and then the money that was hidden didn't even appear on the wills. It's still sitting in Australia in Richard's bank account. So I don't know whether Paul Hitchcock and Richard Hitchcock have gone halves on the $400K and paid off their houses, most likely, and ripped off their own family, or Richard's ripped off everyone. I don't really care. But someone needs to do something quickly. How does a guy in such power get away with ripping off his mother, his stepfather, his brother, his two nieces, and then there's Paul, who's ripped off his mother, his stepfather, and his two daughters? What is wrong with you? Oh, I'm looking as I say this, World Tsunami Awareness Day comes up on my thing from GeoNet. That's right, that was the next vision. Earthquakes and tsunamis. It's not looking good, is it, Christopher Luxon? And this is your IT man that Chris and Jacinda obviously paid off to absolutely destroy me. And they sent me a message back saying recently, oh, look, we can find no evidence on our computers here. Of course you can't. He's the IT man. It's a spy computer. They're given diplomatic immunity. All these gangsters know all about this. They know about all the money. And this whole country is about to break into civil war over Richard ripping off his entire family and coming on 5-year-old children.